We are going to have a great webinar. Everyone is welcome to enter their thoughts and questions in the chat or in Q&A at any time. And it's time for us to get started. So we did the warm-up chat. Here's the overall agenda for this webinar. We're going to be doing a quick poll. We're going to introduce all of our panelists. We're going to have a chat storm to get all of you started in entering your thoughts into the chat throughout this. And then we're going to hear from our panelists on several topics: their careers, leveraging the skills that they've developed, their thoughts on that, their thoughts on transitioning from one position to another position, and recommendations they might have on preparing for alternate careers. Let's go ahead and we're going to do that poll that I mentioned right now. And for some of you who joined the last webinar, this should be something similar. You've seen it before. We just want to know a little bit more about who's with us right now. Which describes you? Are you a grad student, an undergrad student, a postdoctoral researcher? Are you a professor, a scientist or researcher, a scientist enthusiast, an educator? None of these. How would you qualify yourself? What would you categorize yourself as? We're going to give you about 5 more seconds to continue to answer. It looks like most of you have already responded. 4, 3, 2, and 1. And we've got a big variety here. It looks like we've got a lot of grad students, a number of undergrads, some postdoctoral researchers, some scientists, some enthusiasts. And I think we even had a few people, a couple educators, and a few people who said none of these quite fit who they are right now. But thank you all so much for kind of giving us a better picture for who's with us right now. We appreciate that. Let's go ahead and let's hear from our panelists at this point. Please join me in welcoming them. Dr. Elizabeth Frank, Dr. Colin Hamill, and Dr. Tanya Harrison. Elizabeth, do you want to say a couple words about yourself?
Sure. So I'll just walk through a bit of my background and folks could ask me for details later. But at the highest level, I've got a PhD from CU Boulder in planetary geochemistry. After that, I worked on NASA's Messenger mission as a postdoc. Sorry, I'm like week 5 into a cold right now. And over the course of that experience, I realized that as much as I love space exploration, I love missions, some of the day-to-day parts of being a scientist just weren't what I was hoping for out of my career. And so I spent about a year of my postdoc trying to pivot my career in industry because I wanted to work in a more dynamic, faster environment. And so I'm happy to talk more in detail about what that looks like, but basically I was able to pivot my career into aerospace startups where I've been ever since. So this is almost 10 years ago now, which is crazy. The first aerospace startup I worked at was at Planetary Resources, the asteroid mining company. And there I led the science definition for an asteroid prospecting mission, and basically learned how to work at the interface of science and engineering in a very small, dynamic, fast-moving environment. That company unfortunately failed. And so that's the downside of working in startups, is that they don't always work out. Most of them don't, in fact. But after that, I joined an engineering consulting firm called First Mode, which was formed by some of my former coworkers at Planetary Resources. And there I led engineering consulting projects and in multiple sectors, not just in aerospace, actually primarily in the mining industry, which is a really eye-opening perspective on looking at just what other industries and sectors are out there and what kind of problems and challenges are the same and how solutions can be similar too. From there, I started initially basically working as a systems engineer, worked my way up to chief scientist. So I was there when the company was 12 people and I left when it was 175. So I really saw the growth and development and maturation of a company. Unfortunately, the company was too successful in mining clean technology and decided to drop the aerospace part of the business. And so I moved on from there in my career to a company called Quantum Space, where I was chief planetary scientist and did a lot of mission concept work for cislunar missions, basically missions that are happening around the moon and between the Earth and the moon. I went on maternity leave, came back, and I moved into a different position in business development for civil space for NASA and NOAA. But then Interloon came knocking on my door. Interloon, where I am now as chief scientist, is a company that is aiming to harvest helium-3 from the moon for applications here on Earth. And so we're still small, but we're mighty and growing quickly. It's a very exciting opportunity and time to be here. And so I work every day next to engineers, like literally next to engineers, working on mission development, proposals, strategy, that kind of thing. And so I've that's for startups in case you're counting. So I'm pretty well versed in the new space sector, as some might say, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have about that career path.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions about all of that. I appreciate it. Colin, would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Colin Hamill. Right now, I am the John Bacall Public Policy Fellow for the American Astronomical Society. So I do a lot of advocacy for astronomy as a whole. And really what that means is I do a lot of meetings right now with congressional staffers here in DC. I also write a lot of letters, usually to congressmen, agency officials. Even right now, we've been sending a lot of letters to the FCC in relations to radio astronomy and their regulatory environment right now. So there's a whole lot that it means to be a policy fellow. And last year, I graduated with a PhD in planetary science. I studied the exoplanet cloud scattering properties, usually for hot Jupiters and mini Neptunes. I did that in the lab, shining lasers at particles, and then I also did a lot of modeling work. And I think I'll just leave it there. So in a couple of slides, we'll be able to talk more about our career journeys, right, Christine?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you
good.
so much. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Tanya, how about you?
Hi, I'm Tanya Harrison. I'm currently the Director of Earth and Space Science at a company in Canada called Mission Control and a fellow of the Outer Space Institute based out of the University of British Columbia. My background is in Mars. I did a master's degree working on hyperspectral stuff for Mars, and then went into industry for 4 years working in science and mission operations for Malin Space Science Systems, which has built a lot of the cameras that have gone to Mars on multiple satellites and rovers. And then for many reasons, maybe we'll get into them, maybe we won't, I left and decided to go back and get a PhD at the University of Western Ontario. And my intent had originally been to go back to maybe work at JPL because Malin was a JPL subcontractor, go back to JPL and work on missions. Instead, Arizona State University called me out of the blue and they said, hey, we've launched this thing called the New Space Initiative, where we're trying to make partnerships between commercial space companies and the university for tech development missions and things like that. We're looking for someone to come in who isn't interested in a traditional tenure track faculty position, and your name came up as a suggestion, would you be interested? And I thought, okay, yeah, this sounds really interesting. The new space sector was still pretty nascent at the time. So I took that role, and that eventually led me to learning about what was happening in the space industry, actually connected with Elizabeth while she was working at Planetary Resources. And through there, I ended up connecting with an Earth observation company called Planet. They essentially poached me out of ASU a few years into that role to come on and lead their relationship initially with NASA, and then that grew into leading their global science strategy. Did that for a few years, and then started doing essentially freelance consulting for a couple of years. So I was a science advisor for a few different companies, including GHGSat, which is a methane monitoring satellite company in Montreal, and Mission Control. And then I decided to come on to Mission Control full-time a little bit earlier this year, doing mostly lunar and Earth observation stuff. But if we want to talk more about details, we can discuss that later. And then Outer Space Institute is kind of like my connected academic affiliation, so I can still do a little bit of sciencey things that maybe don't tie directly to my job, and also give me a little bit more freedom to talk about certain things that you might not have if you were representing like just a company in a role when you're talking about things related to space.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now it's time for all of our participants to chime in on something. So I've got a chat storm, and what we're going to do here for this is I'm inviting everyone to think and to start typing, but not to hit return. We're going to do a chat storm, which means that you're going to think about how you want to answer this. You can start to type, do not hit return, and when we'll have a little bit of a countdown where everybody will hit return. So the question is, what's one suggestion on how to transition from one field or type of position to another field or type of position? And I'm asking all of our participants, all of the attendees for this webinar, to go ahead and start to type on this, think about it, what suggestion you have. For our panelists, you can type, but you can also answer out loud. But we're going to give everybody about 15 to 20 seconds to think about this. So that way they can think, start to type, and in about 15 seconds, we'll ask everybody to hit return at the same time. So everyone is welcome to start to answer this in the chat. And hold off on hitting return for about 10 more seconds. And we're going to go ahead, and those of you who have finished typing, you are welcome to hit return in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And here we have some answers. Yay! And while we're looking at those and going through those, I will invite any of our panelists who want to chime in and start to share their ideas as well to please do so.
I can go first.
Thank you,
I
Colin.
think a big one, and I know this is a very DC thing to say, but it's networking, right? It's really all about who you know, making those connections organically, and just putting yourself out there a little bit, right? And also selling yourself, because all of us as scientists have a lot of great skills, right? Both technical skills, but also communication skills. And a lot of those are very transferable. So we just have to sell ourselves, get to know some people, and make that transition.
Absolutely. And it looks like a few of the folks in the chat have also put down making those connections and networking. And some of you aren't really sure yet. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I would think about what job activities you actually like doing, whether it's programming, whether it's technical writing, whatever it might be, lab work, etc. And then go to a job search engine like Indeed or LinkedIn or Glassdoor or any other one and put those keywords in and see what jobs come up related to those skills. And then that gives you kind of a flavor for what kind of industries would actually use those skills. And then go a step further, find people on LinkedIn with those job titles and reach out, send them a cold note, just say, hey, would love 15 minutes of your time for an informational interview, but want to understand your career path. It sounds fascinating. You'd be surprised how many people actually say yes, especially for students.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tanya, please go ahead.
I think when you're coming from like a STEM background in particular, and you've been in academia for a while, you can view your experience with a very narrow lens. I know when I was about to finish, like I said before, my PhD is in Martian landslides. I was like, what am I going to do with this if I'm not a professor? And it took meeting with somebody at a job fair who helped me zoom out a bit and say, well, your expertise is actually in satellite image interpretation. A camera, and you do camera operations. Well, a camera is a camera regardless of what you point it at. And that was such an eye-opening experience, which seems really obvious now, but at the time, I wasn't thinking about the skills that I had in the broader picture. So when you're thinking of yourself like, oh man, I'm like just an optical physicist, or I only do this particular thing, like zoom out and think about all the skills that you've learned in the process of becoming that, because a lot of those will play into searching for the roles, like in places like LinkedIn, where you can look for those skills and figure out what are the jobs actually called that you're looking for that can take the skill set that you've learned while becoming a scientist and actually use that to get a job in industry if that's the way you're looking to go.
Thank you. And it looks like many of you put down in the chat things about networking, about contacting, some interesting ideas in here, volunteering with the other field to find out if you like it, attending events in person or online to build evidence and for your CV, attending conferences and learning more and talking more with folks from these different fields, these different types of positions. Again, this idea that you all, our panelists, have said about focusing on your skills and your interests, what you're interested in, researching the information and networking, informational interviews. That's interesting. Finding out more by interviewing somebody to find out more information about that field or about that area. So, wonderful. Well, let's move ahead now at this point. I'd like to hear a little bit more about each of our panelists' career journeys. And there's a few questions that some of our participants have posted, how well prepared were you about these different types of careers when you first were graduating, when you completed your postdoc? How did you end up on this current path? What's emphasize and how your work might be different from earlier positions, how these new positions that you're in are different. And yeah, so Colin, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure. So I'm in a postdoctoral fellowship. So in a lot of ways, my career has just begun, but I'll talk a little bit about my undergrad and my graduate career and what allowed me to step into this policy role today. So I got an undergraduate degree in physics from Towson University. It's a liberal arts school in Baltimore, which is where I grew up. I just commuted for undergrad. While I was there, I did some work studying the circumgalactic medium with Dr. Jennifer Scott. During my last year of undergrad, I was also an intern at the Applied Physics Lab, where I was working with Dr. Nancy Chabot. I was studying Mercury's volatile polar deposits and also working in the meteorite lab. And all those research experiences allowed me to get my PhD in planetary science from Purdue University with Dr. Alexandria Johnson, where I was studying the light scattering properties of exoplanet clouds. About my second year of graduate school, I got really interested in politics and policy. So one of the first things I did is I attended a summer policy colloquium by the American Meteorological Society. I'm not a meteorologist, but I studied exoplanet atmospheres, and I sent an application, and they thought it was good enough for me to tag along, hanging out with a lot of climate scientists and meteorologists. And it was a great time, and it was just a crash course in science policy. I got the chance to meet a senator and a bunch of high-level staffers on the Hill and in the White House, and it was amazing. It really opened up my eyes for the first time about what policy actually is, because I really didn't even know, and to continue going down that path. The second thing I did that was policy related is I joined the Division for Planetary Sciences Federal Relations Subcommittee. Division for Planetary Sciences, DPS, is a part of AAS, where I am now. And with that, I went to the Hill once a week in the summer and just did very similar to what I'm doing now, just advocating for science, right? From the planetary science perspective about what our community is feeling and kind of what our priorities are, both like fiscally and just more generally policy related. And that was really eye-opening to not only have the crash course in science policy, but also now have like some firsthand experience about what it means to do science policy and work with staffers and congressmen and senators in some cases, which was great. I also took a couple classes at Purdue in their political science department, right? I'm coming from Earth Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences department, but my advisor said, hey, look, as long as you're getting your research done, you can go do what you feel. So I was able to set out the time to take a couple policy classes, and that was really awesome for like building my foundation of understanding in policy. Those classes were actually environmental policy because there wasn't a lot of science or space policy happening at Purdue. So I worked with what was available to me. And with all those experiences, I was able to get this position now as a John Bacall Public Policy Fellow. And it has been great. I've been here for almost 1 year. I actually started the week before the inauguration of Trump 2.0 this January. So there's been a lot happening this year, as I'm sure all of you know. So really thrown right into it, and it's been great so far. I'm happy to answer any more pointed questions about my experiences this far as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. And for folks, if you have specific questions for any of our panelists or in general, you are welcome to enter those in the chat or the Q&A at any time. Tanya, would you like to go next this time?
Sure. So I feel like a bunch of things in my career path kind of happened unintentionally. But the shortest version, I guess, so when I was working in mission operations for Mars stuff, one of my roles was essentially change detection. I was looking at pictures that we were taking with the cameras we were operating to see if there were new craters or different weather patterns happening on Mars, and what impact that would have on operations. But also, as a Mars scientist, were those pictures telling us anything interesting about the geologic history of Mars? And one of the cameras I worked on was called Marcy, the Mars Color Imager, which would image Mars every day to look for change, like the whole planet every day. So fast forward to when I was working at Arizona State University, I co-taught a class called Commercial Opportunities in Space, where we were bringing in people from different new space companies to talk about their career paths personally, how they got to these companies, and then what the companies themselves were doing to try to give students a bigger picture of what was happening in the space industry so that they knew what job options were out there beyond academia or NASA or maybe a big aerospace prime like Boeing or Lockheed or something like that. And I think the second company we brought in when I started was Planet. And at that point, the company was like 30 people in their first office in San Francisco, building satellites in their lunchroom behind a shower curtain from Target. Like, it was very, very upstarty. But this guy came in who was an engineer from the early days, and he started describing this company that had the goal of imaging the whole planet every day to look for change. And I was like, that's what I did on Mars. That's so cool that someone wants to do that for Earth. And he was describing this company that just sounded like, I don't know, very much the stereotype of what you might picture a Bay Area startup in the early 2010s might be like. Building battle bots and like taking time off for Burning Man and stuff like that. And I just thought it sounded really cool. And so I thought, I really want to work for this company, but how do I convince a company that does Earth observation to hire somebody with a PhD in Martian landslides? So that's when I started thinking about this camera experience. And I knew that some of the folks that worked there were former NASA people, and I connected with them on Twitter, because this was before Twitter had imploded, and just started connecting with folks, kind of like Elizabeth was saying for people to do. I was like, hey, you sound really cool, your job sounds cool, tell me more. And that evolved into, well, hey, we as a company haven't actually done much in the way of space operations yet, but you have with NASA. So do you want to come and give a colloquium presentation about how you do this for Mars? And maybe there's something we can learn about that for planning our constellation for Earth. So I went to visit the company. It was super cool. So I was very much like, okay, I have to work for these folks. And I just started making excuses to go to San Francisco. And I would be like, hey, I just happen to be in town. Can I come on by the office? But really, I was just going to network with them. And so eventually, I joined this science ambassadors program they had where they picked like a dozen people to give free data to for the scientific research they were doing in exchange for promoting their data to the science community at large. And so I got to really know the company, the people there, the data products, and how to work with them. And so a few years later, when they launched a full university program, they wanted to work with ASU to be their first embedded academic partner. So I helped them design their university program from the university side, the licensing language, the pricing, what types of products did people want to see, promote that to the university to get people to want to pay for the license. And then a little bit after that, they got this very large contract with NASA to essentially provide data to the whole federally funded research community in the US. So they called me up and they were like, hey, we need somebody that speaks planet language, NASA language, and general, remote sensing scientist language. You've already been doing that for like 3 years for us at ASU. What would it take for you to leave ASU and come and work for us? So that opportunity somewhat fell into my lap, but also was the work of like 3 years of networking and really getting to know the people in the company. So when I started working with them, they were about 30 people. By the time I started working directly for them, I think I was employee like 428 or something like that. By the time I left, the company was around 1,500 people. So again, like huge growth in a very short period of time. And it was unusual at first because I came into a very undefined role. There wasn't even a job title. They were just like, we want to hire you and we'll figure out the rest later. So I kind of came in and had to suss out, what do I think they need in this particular relationship with NASA, and how can I address their needs? So I did that for, I think, maybe a month before I ended up writing my own job description and then kind of going back to the person that was my boss and saying, like, this is what I think I can do for you and what I think you need. And they were like, great. So that was kind of cool. It was an opportunity to craft your own destiny. And that's one of the really nice things about working in like the startup world is like these companies are figuring out a lot of stuff on the fly, which could maybe be overwhelming if you don't like that kind of environment. Like if you want a lot of boundaries and definition and stuff, probably not the world for you. But if you're just excited to like jump on any opportunity that might come your way, it's a place where you could thrive. Like it's a good kind of chaos if you're that sort of brain. So after a couple of years, I realized that the work that I was doing for them could expand beyond NASA because they were doing work with the global research community. And so I went to the chief of staff. My boss had left, and so it was kind of good timing to like pitch a change. And I said, "Hey, why don't we just expand my role to cover all of science? Because scientists all around the world are the same archetype of data user. And the way we're going to communicate them doesn't really matter if they're based in Europe or the US or Canada or Japan. Like they all have the same kind of goals and the same approach generally to using the data. So got the chance to craft my own destiny again in that sense. Yeah, and then after I left, I was trying to rethink like what do I want to do in my career? What direction do I want to take it? And I really liked this whole idea of controlling your own destiny. So doing consulting was a great way to do that because I could pick which companies I wanted to work with and which projects I found interesting. To be able to do that does require a lot of networking. It's really hard if you're not already kind of a known entity to just jump into doing consulting. So that was the sort of thing where when you started putting the word out that you were doing this, then people that you had interacted with in the time of your life when you were doing other jobs, they're like, oh yeah, we know what this person does. We know what their skill set is and how they might be able to help us. That's a lot easier than trying to knock on doors and find consulting work. So I learned from this experience that even though I loved being a scientist before, and I feel like I was really good at what I did, I really liked the strategic side even more. Like, how do we build strategies for missions and then eventually for entire companies to achieve the goals that they have around either science directly or working with the scientific community on things like research and development or high impact projects. Like I got to work on stuff at Planet that I never would have done anywhere else, like working on food security projects to do rapid response during COVID, food security work to do rapid response when the war in Ukraine broke out, working on like first responder type efforts after large natural disasters. It was really great to work on things where you could directly see in the course of sometimes even days that the work you were doing led to something happening in the real world that was beneficial. And you don't often get to see that when you're in academia. And I think that kind of hammered home to me, like there are some magical things that you can accomplish if you're working on the industry side where things can just move at a completely different pace.
Thank you, Tanya. That's very interesting, all the different things that you've gotten to do. Elizabeth, do you want to expand a little bit more on your career journey?
Sure. You might hear some common themes with Tanya, because pace for me was a big thing. But first off, when I went to grad school, I didn't have a particular path beyond that in mind, but I was pretty open to whatever. Then I taught my first year, and it was a very challenging experience. And I decided pretty quickly that teaching wasn't going to be for me, therefore I wasn't going to be a professor. So that ruled out one obvious direction. So then I assumed, well, I'll probably work for NASA or be a researcher of some kind. And then when I did my postdoc, as exciting and awesome as it was to be on a NASA mission, I realized that some of the day-to-day things just really weren't for me. Like I wanted something that was faster paced. I enjoy writing, but I actually really dislike writing academic peer-reviewed papers, the process of peer review. Like I won't go on my soapbox and rant, but I have a soapbox for that if anybody wants to hear it. But basically, at the end of the day, I didn't find it to be a very satisfying work product. I wanted something that felt more direct and impactful. And I also kind of felt like a little bit isolated in some ways. Like science is very collaborative, but the particular environment that I was in, I was just kind of bored almost on a day to day. And the other part for me was that I didn't have a singular science question that was driving me. Like I know people who are like, I just have to know this thing about how the universe or the solar system operates. And that's the thing that propels them in their career. And I remember literally having a conversation with somebody during my postdoc saying, if somebody offered me $1 million to do research for whatever I wanted to do, I have no idea what I would do. And so at that point, I decided that, something like a bigger change was required. I did not have a supportive PhD advisor. In fact, he like actively discouraged me from not fulfilling his version of what success looked like. But my postdoc advisor was supportive, although he didn't know specifically how to help me find a career in industry. So I really had to spend about a year of my postdoc just trying to figure out what are my skills, what's transferable, what am I interested in, doing a lot of really self-reflection on what I wanted out of my career. And specifically what I pinned on was geospatial analysis, which is basically using maps and spatial data to learn things and process them and analyze them, that kind of thing. So I was doing that for my postdoc. And I had also been doing, I hadn't realized it at the time, but Tanya's touched on networking a couple of times. I'm naturally just an extrovert and a good networker, and I hadn't realized it at the time, but when I was in this period of trying to figure out what to do with my life, I was calling people like, hey, like, what opportunities do you think are really exciting? What should I do? Like trying to get ideas on just, from people who knew me and who I trusted, like what I could do in terms of my career. And one person said, you should keep an eye on this company, Planetary Resources. And so I kept an eye on them. I followed them. And when a few months later, a job rec came out and it was for geospatial and an analyst at Planetary Resources, I was like, oh my God, I'm a planetary scientist who wants to be a geospatial analyst. I need this job stat. So I reached out to that friend who knew the CEO, got an email intro to the CEO. So they saw my resume right away. 2 months later, I had a job offer. So that's just like a really good, important note about networking. It's not even that, you have to have this like transactional interaction ahead of time. It's more like, think about it, how you can just put, people in your virtual Rolodex and think about how can I help them out in the future? How can they help me out in the future? You never know what that thing's going to be. You kind of want to set yourself up for success, and to kind of Tanya's point before, make your own luck. Because I've been doing that proactive research on my career for like a year and reaching out to people so that when the time came for the opportunity, I knew the difference between a CV and a resume. I knew to send a resume, not a CV. I knew who to call. Like I just knew all the right moves to make. And so that was not something that I'd ever been exposed to in grad school, unfortunately. I do think the culture around that is changing, especially, unfortunately, rapidly recently. But that was a lot of self-taught, like figuring things out, and it's worked out for me ever since. And then I do want to note one thing that I did that I'm really glad I did was that I had the opportunity to join the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group Executive Committee. And at the time, it wasn't really a part of my day job, but it was a thing I did as a volunteer. I was the chair of the Commercial Advisory Board because I'd been in the commercial sector for a few years at that point. And it really set me up for success in the role that I have now because I know a lot of the players in the lunar science community. And so Colin was talking about the things that he was doing to learn about public policy. And I'm guessing he wasn't paid for all of those things. So if you're interested in a particular direction, take on volunteer roles to kind of learn who the big players are, understand the mechanics of the community, and just see what opportunities are out there, because you never kind of know what you're setting yourself up for opportunity-wise in the future.
Wonderful.
I'll stop there.
Great points. Thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to go ahead and move on a little bit to something that you've each kind of touched on already, but this idea of skills, leveraging skills you've developed. So do any of you, as a starting point, want to suggest some technical skills that many of the people who are probably with us right now might already have that are valuable? What, programming or lab techniques or instrumentation or other types of skills are really valuable to industry, to academic positions, to NASA, to other space agencies, to AAS, the DPS? What skills are people likely to have that they're not even thinking about?
I want to start out with like a reframe almost. Something that was touched on earlier as well, but putting a finer point on it. In academia, people perform their professional identity about the topic of their expertise. But outside of academia, it's really more about your skill set, the core skills that you do to show results and be successful in your job. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but I think it's a useful oversimplification because it was kind of the gear shift that I personally had to do to think about what skills could be useful. Now, in terms of specific skills, I mentioned geospatial analysis. I was using tools like ArcGIS. I was using NV, so some of the remote sensing data processing tools that are very common for those in the community who do remote sensing based work. Learning how to write like just papers, it turns out technical writing in and of itself is a skill. One thing that I've observed working with engineers who don't have a PhD, because in engineering you don't really need as much of a PhD or as much education to just as much as it is important just to do projects and get experience. I am very good at like hunting down information and synthesizing it, and that's a skill that any PhD has to do, whether that's just trying to go in literature and get a quick answer or a best guess for now. So that is hard to quantify and describe, just like put in a bullet type of skill, but it's very, very useful. And then also thinking about like who you know and what you know. I can't underestimate how important networking is. And so anytime you go to a poster session and you're talking to somebody at a poster, guess what? That's networking. You go to the bar after LPSC, you're networking. And so you never really know how these things are going to play out later on. Beyond that, like skills are very dependent on the job that you're targeting. And so what might be good for someone who does computational type stuff is not going to be the same type of thing or opportunity that someone who has lab-based type stuff might target. So it's going to be very specific to the type of research that you do. And I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Would either of our other panelists want to weigh in with anything that hasn't been mentioned yet? Add to this.
The communication between technical and non-technical people is absolutely massive. I think like the idea of science communication is kind of dismissed in academia as something very fluffy, but I would say that like 90% of my success in my roles in industry has been due to the ability to translate between things scientists and engineers are saying, and not just translating that into like, what does this mean in more of a plain language summary, but how do I word what's happening in the technical side in the right words for a salesperson to care, for a product person to care, for an investor to care, because that's all different framings that you might want to take of the same topic. And so skills like that can be really useful for things like business development. You need to be able to take the technical jargon of what your company is doing and explain it to maybe somebody on the other side at a different company or a government agency or a nonprofit who may not be technical, or they might be technical in a different area than you are. So that's a really important skill to have. If you're working in a company where you want to get like the sales team to understand why the science that your data supports is important, for example, you need to be able to frame it in terms of dollars, or like what are you getting out of this type of research or these academic partnerships? What is that bringing into the company that can translate to profit down the line in a lot of cases? I'm sure on the policy side, I'll let Colin talk about it more, but certainly when you're talking to like your political representatives, you can't just try to make the case that like what you're studying is cool and that's why they should fund science. They need to understand, why is it economically beneficial? How many jobs is that generating in their particular district? What is the amount of money that they're getting for their investment? Like how many dollars does each dollar in like generating a particular field? Like these are the kind of things that they care about. And you need to be able to talk about it in the language that they will care about so that they'll want to keep listening to you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah.
Colin,
Yeah,
please
Tanya,
go right ahead.
Yeah, Tanya beat me to it because communication is definitely the number one transferable skill in policy, right? It's about talking to different audiences and figuring out what they want to hear and framing it in the way that they want to hear it. That example of thinking about the economic benefits is a huge one, right? That's something that we do all the time about how many jobs we bring to the district, but also it's the ability to tell a story, right? The case of policy. So those numbers are great, but really the thing that a lot of people remember are your personal stories as well. And that is a skill, to say that in a convincing way, in a way that'll be memorable. So I think I'll leave it there because a lot of the other points have already been spoken to.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll add that the same thing is true if anyone here wanted to go into something like public engagement or outreach. Communication is fundamental to all of those as well. Let's move along to suggestions on transitioning to different positions. Are there particular career paths right now, and everything of course changes with time, and the answer might be different next month. Are there traditional career paths or new and innovative career paths that might be recruiting more right now? Any recommendations on those who want to find and acquire jobs outside of research in communication and outreach, how people can find these jobs? And you've already touched on that a little bit. And how to return, how to go from one position to another one and then back to the first one. Any ideas from anyone on any of these questions? And I suspect that these questions about how to transition from one to another, generically, I don't think anyone has all the answers, so that would be hard to do. But is there any one suggestion that you might make that you haven't already had the chance to make on how to transition besides networking and besides getting that initial foot in the door through a conference or a training?
I just want to emphasize how important it is to identify your skills in your job, the things that you do, because that's what's going to be what helps you get your foot in the door, or at least helps you get a job, not even identify what jobs you're even qualified for. And while I'm thinking about it, there's like a statistic out there of like the average person who gets hired only has like 60% of the required bullets on a job description. So even if you don't have all of the skills that are listed, it's still often worth applying, although it's even better if you know somebody who works at the company to make sure your resume gets seen, because there's just a lot of slop these days from AI. And I know from the hiring side, it can be a real nightmare to go through resumes. And so you just want to make sure that your resume gets seen and a human puts eyeballs on it to make sure it gets properly evaluated. So that kind of touches on the networking part of it, but also just don't sell yourself short. Like, if you see an opportunity that sounds very interesting to you.
I think building on that answer a little bit, like in academia, it's usually like a very, like you need to meet all these requirements. We're looking for like a certain number of publications and like we're hiring in a very specific area. But when you're looking at a job description, they're not necessarily expecting you to meet all those requirements. And at multiple places that I've been at, in the hiring process, whether or not it seems like you will be a good cultural fit for the team is just as important as the skill set that you're bringing to the table. Because you could be a genius, but if you come across as a jerk in an interview, everybody on that interview panel is going to be like, don't hire this person. They're not going to work well on the team. Because they can teach you the things that you need to know, but you can't teach someone how to not be a jerk. So that's another big just life tip in general. Be a nice person and people will want to work with you.
Just to underscore that point, I've definitely been in hiring panels where we've interviewed someone who, was amazing technically, and people thought that person was not going to be good to work with, and they didn't get the job on the basis of how they presented themselves in the interview. So again, just underscoring that cultural fit and making sure that, you'd be a good teammate and a good collaborator is incredibly important. It's not just about, technical chops.
Great points. Related to all of this, I've heard from each of you in terms of how you found out about new positions, and a lot of that was networking, being in the right spot. Are there other places or organizations or web pages that you would recommend people go to find out about potential new careers or opportunities?
One thing I noticed in my own job search is that LinkedIn's algorithm tends to be pretty different from Indeed and Glassdoor, which seem to deliver the same results. I need to look it up. But there are a couple space related, like space industry specific related job search engines that I know of. But I should look up the specific one. I'll share it in the channel in a moment. But it's worth looking at multiple search engines just because you never know if they're all Like I know on the company side, for example, like companies can pay, they'll pay to put their jobs up on LinkedIn, but they may not pay to put it up on Indeed or whatever. So there's going to be different positions posted depending on what companies are doing. And sometimes they don't do any. And sometimes you have to actually go to the company's website. So you have to know the company exists and then look it up at the right time and hope that there's like an opportunity that looks similar to your background. So there's a lot of, unfortunately, manual parts of it. And there's probably AI tools these days that can help you sort through that, although I don't have any experience in those, but maybe they're worth looking into.
Yeah, I agree that it's always good to look at multiple search engines, but honestly, most of the positions that I find out about are from my advisors and my colleagues and my friends, right? So just telling people, right, in your circle, like, hey, I'm on the market, I'm looking for something. And usually they will send things because oftentimes they'll see it before you, and that can really go a long way. So I would ask, but that's really important too.
Wonderful. Great points. Great points. Let's move on from here. And I saw several great things in the chat too. Thank you everyone who's posting both questions and suggestions and recommendations in the chat about ways to look for things. And I know that a number of folks that are on here are undergraduates and wondering whether their degree in computer science or biology or other things that don't seem directly connected to planetary science or astrobiology will get you into these fields. And the answer that I've heard from others is yes, there are ways to get from some of these other science, materials science, scientific computing, environmental systems, that there are ways to get from that into various planetary and broader space science careers. Does anyone on the panel want to add anything to that?
I think on the industry side, you have a lot of flexibility to figure out like what you want to do, and you're not quite as locked in as an academic track. Like I think Elizabeth, you said you were essentially doing systems engineering at one point, right? But you're not an engineer, you're a geophysicist. That you would never get that opportunity if you were trying to become like a systems engineering professor at a university. So you can kind of just choose like what are the skill sets that I want to develop, and also to Colin's point about like marketing yourself, how do you want to sell yourself when you're applying for these jobs or trying to make a move within the company that you're in, which can also be maybe a little bit easier way to transition. Like if you've been in a place for a while and you're like, hey, I'd like to change it up a little bit. This is easier to do at smaller companies, I think. Could I start working on this other project or learn a little bit more about this thing? So that can be a way to kind of set yourself up to transition and move in a slightly different direction if you're looking to do something new. Like the company I'm at right now, one of the engineers decided that he wanted to try business development. And so, we're a company of about 30 people. He went to the CEO and was like, I've been here as an engineer for, I think maybe 5 years. Looking to try something new. Would you mind if I tried doing BD? And he was like, sure. So now his career has gone in a completely different direction from what he was doing before, which was, I think, purely electrical engineering.
Yeah, riffing on that, I think one thing too to keep in mind, especially from the industry side, but really broadly outside of academia. In academia, I think the thinking is often that you do your PhD, you do your postdoc, you get your permanent position, and then 40 years later, you either retire or later on you die in that position, right? You just like stay in the same position. I have been at 4 companies. I don't even know how many job titles at this point, but probably something like 6 to 8. I'd actually have to go back and count. My point is that your next job doesn't have to be your forever job. So even if you're willing to maybe there's a job opportunity and it's like a good fit, but you're not like 100% in, keep in mind that it could be a stepping stone to something else in the future. So your next job doesn't have to be your forever job. And it's okay to compromise a bit in the near term, especially if you have to, balance out family things or work-life balance or other parts of your life, because you are, after all, a whole human, not just a professional worker. So keep that in mind, that it's okay to take short-term sacrifices on stuff, and you can always, get your dream job later. It's a matter of finding the right balance for whatever is important to you at this moment in life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is a great intro into this other topic here on preparing for these alternative careers, and so we're looking here at not the NASA position and not the academic position, but any of these other positions, what recommendations might you have on preparing for them? We've heard a number of ideas so far, such as networking and making contacts and volunteering and attending trainings and conferences. Anything else specific? One question that's come up frequently is, are there positions for people who have a master's or for people with a bachelor's, if they just want to kind of get started from there and then make changes?
I think if you're looking at going into industry, a lot of times, unless you're trying to be in like a sort of a leadership role, a PhD is actually overkill. Like one of the companies I worked for, they specifically did not hire people with PhDs because they thought they were too specialized and too kind of set in their ways, and they wouldn't be flexible enough to teach them the things that they wanted them to learn to do the specific job they were being asked to do. So a lot of times I tend to suggest to students, if you're not looking to go into academia as your career path, the opportunity cost of doing a PhD is probably not worth it, because you will get so much farther in your career in every sense of the word, monetarily, retirement plans, baking your ability to take vacations, all that. It will happen so much faster if you spend those 4 to 6 years working in the industry than it would if you take the time to do a PhD. So it is totally possible to get a job at the master's level. Bachelor's level is a little bit more limiting depending on the types of roles you want to do. Like a master's does give you that slight leg up because it shows that you know how to do a little bit more complicated work. You maybe know how to do a little bit more focused research. But unless you just really want a PhD, I'm not gonna lie, it is kind of cool to call yourself doctor. I don't know if it's necessarily worth all of the pain and effort and many years of being completely broke if it's not something that is going to like further you in your career. So that can be a really personal decision, but it is certainly possible to have a successful career without a PhD. I mean, the CEO of the company I work for right now doesn't have a PhD. I think maybe most of the people here don't. There's maybe like 4 of us, and I think we are statistically anomalous for the size of the company we are.
Thank you. Any add-ons to that?
Yeah, maybe riffing off of Tanya for a moment. Again, I'm one of just a couple planetary scientists at what is mostly a company of engineers. And so I hear a lot of what I hear is like an engineering bias, but just to drive home the point about a PhD being overkill, I think if anything, at least among the engineers, there's a bias against PhDs because PhDs tend to be, by necessity, have to be very scrappy in their labs and don't necessarily have a lot of resources at hand. And so if you are an engineer, and this is going to be similar, whatever discipline or subdiscipline exists that you're talking about, there's best practices that are just easier to learn if you don't know anything, because you're basically, I don't want to say like a blank slate exactly, but like if you come in as an early career person, people expect you to come in, fresh out of your master's, fresh out of your bachelor's or whatever, and just be open to learning and figure out what those best practices are and then developing experiences in those best practices. But PhDs may have some, let's say, bad habits compared to whatever the best practices are. And so I see that play out a lot in engineering. I haven't seen it directly in the sciences. I'm not totally sure if that applies as well, but it might. So just wanted to throw that point out there that a PhD doesn't guarantee employment. And if anything, it could be overkill, exactly like what Tanya was saying. But at the same time, I think I needed a PhD to get to where I am today. So it's a choose your own adventure, identify what your career goal is, and if a PhD is actually appropriate for it or not.
Thank you. Colin, I know that you've got this experience right now with policy at AAS. Do you interact with other organizations that also do a fair amount of policy, like AGU? And do you want to talk a little bit about what the broader field looks like?
Sure. Yeah, it's we don't work in a vacuum. We work a lot with AGU, with Planetary Society, with the American Physical Society, just to name the top few that we really interact with the most, right? But we're in this ecosystem of scientists, and given this year that we're in, we're also reaching out to the broader scientific field, right? We're reaching out to the biologists, the ecologists, the material scientists, right? Because we're all coming together for the problems that we're facing today. So it's been really rewarding to see that scientific ecosystem, right, from more of the top-down perspective. and to see us all working together. Because yeah, it takes all of us, and AAS is just one small part, all working towards a similar goal.
Awesome. So for people who are interested in learning more about policy, we'd recommend that they not only reach out to you and to AAS, but to any of the other organizations as well that you've just mentioned
Yes.
here in the US. I presume that other countries will probably similarly have scientists and organizations that are interested in policy too. There's been a lot of really, really great notes in the chat, and we're running out of time. I wanted to share with all of our participants we've got a couple of webinars coming up, one on tailoring your professional communications. All of our panelists today have talked a little bit about the role that communications might play in different careers, and so this one will be a little bit more on that. It'll be more of a workshop. And then another workshop on strategies for successful interviews. And given the interest that we've had in understanding more about grad school and those sorts of directions, we might add another one about grad school as well. So all of these are on our scientist engagement page. And on this page this is where future things like recordings of webinars will appear. And this is also where, if we put together a handout of resources from our panelists and others, it will appear. And of course, we've also got a website with news for students and early career researchers. And you are all welcome to not only review that, but send suggestions and recommendations. So back to our panelists, do you have any final thoughts that you want to make sure that you get the chance to share with all of our attendees today?
I can start. I think that, again, things are changing a bit culturally, but there's just a survivorship bias in academia of the people that you interact with, the people who were able to make it in academia, but not everybody stays in academia. So you don't necessarily get to see those people who didn't set on that path. And there can be a bias against other paths that aren't deemed as successful. But I want to say that, only you get to define what success means to you. And so if people are saying that you are making a mistake by choosing a career path that's non-traditional, ignore them. Just trust yourself, trust your instinct, and that'll be the best way to go.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. That's kind of line of what I was going to say too. I feel like Elizabeth and I are the same person. Oh gosh, how was I going to word it? Yeah, I hate the idea of thinking about non-academic paths as like alternative career paths or leaving academia or like it's a lesser option. Like, we have to exist in society. We have bills to pay. You need to be able to survive. It's a job. And you can find a job that you love just as much as the research that you were doing. And no one else should tell you whether or not your career has been successful based on the choice that you've made and the path you've chosen to go down. I think I saw in sort of the questions submitted in advance that got sent around to us, somebody said they didn't want to sell out to a big corporation. Try not to think about industry that way. Like, industry is not inherently evil. Corporations are not inherently evil. It's what you're doing there. You can choose not to work at a place that you see as being evil. There's a lot of options out there. And so don't think that you're a failure if you don't decide to be a professor or you don't get a professor position. There's still a lot of amazing work being done. And honestly, if you want to do stuff that has a big impact on the world, often the fastest way to do that is to do it through a company, because they can just move more quickly than a university or even a government can do. And so that makes it kind of an exciting place to be at the end of the day.
Thank you. Colin, you get the final word.
Sure. The only thing that I want to say is that my line is always open for anybody who wants to chat more about anything policy related, because I'm happy to be a resource for anyone here.
So I know we're out of time. Everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists. We are so grateful for all of their time and effort, and hope to have this presentation soon on the website, and reach out to us with more questions. There's so many questions we didn't get to. We'll try to get to more of those next webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.